everyone, it's Kay from Crafting with Kay. How are we all doing? So welcome to my new segment called The Reading Nook. I reached out to an excellent author called Sharon Hannaford, and she gladly gave me permission to read her Hellcat series to you. She's one of my top 2 favourite authors of all time. I have a couple of mugs, so fill up a cup and drink and join us for the project. So, what perfect diamond painting to use? The little dragon, reading a book, drinking a drink, cozying up for the night, ready to read for the evening. So grab a project, grab a drink, and listen along. Just a heads up, I'm not the best at reading out loud, so I will probably butcher some names, but please, I will get there in the end. Either way, I hope you enjoy this new segment. Take care, guys.
Chapter 2. Saying that he switched schools a lot as a child was rather like saying the Pope prayed a lot. In fact, he couldn't remember spending more than 2 terms at any one school. His mother was a single parent, and they lived on the small wages she made from casual work on farms or in factories or restaurants, moving on once work dried up or his mother felt it was time to go. When he approached his teens, he finally put his foot down and threatened to drop out of school if they moved again. It was an incentive she needed to settle down and keep one job. She found work as a housekeeper for a wealthy family in one of the better suburbs in the edge of the rural, forested area. She and Carl were given the use of a small self-contained apartment above the garage. He'd been enrolled in the local high school, which was full of rich, snobby types, along with a few poorer souls who were allowed in from lower-class suburbs because they excelled either academically or in sports. It'd been important for Carl and his mum to settle down near a rural area. Werewolves needed access to a large forested area during the time of the full moon, and his mum had been a werewolf since shortly before his birth. Werewolves were often volatile creatures who struggled to contain their tempers and were forced to change to wolf form over the 3 days of the full moon. Fortunately, the need to change was strongest at night, once the moon had rose. So as long as his mum wasn't expected to work in the evenings and managed to keep her temper during the day, the housekeeping work suited her perfectly. Her supernatural strength made the daily chores easy, and she was generally finished with everything before the bratty kids arrived home from school, minimising the chance of them igniting her temper. To Carl's utter astonishment, it had worked out amazingly well. A few weeks after he started attending Parkhurst High, he met her. Carl had certain abilities that no one else in the world possessed, or so he thought. These abilities stemmed from the fact that when his mother had been infected with the LiQWYD virus, she had been over 8 months pregnant. She'd survived the attack of the werewolf as well as the attack of the virus and had given birth to him a few days later. Shortly before she underwent her first change, she never told him the exact details of how she coped those first few weeks and months. It had obviously been an extremely difficult time for both her and his father. Carl seemed to be a perfectly healthy baby and didn't seem to be affected by the LiQWYD virus. His mother had hoped that somehow the womb had protected him. Carl's father hung around for a year or so and then vanished, leaving her and Carl to fend for themselves. Carl still had no idea where his father was or even if he was still alive. As Carl grew, it became apparent that he had been affected by the virus, but not in the usual way. He possessed heightened senses of smell, hearing and eyesight, and an uncanny ability to move absolutely silently. He was fearless and agile, and often astounded other people with his physical coordination and ability. His mother began to tell people he was older than he actually was, for fear that someone would begin asking uncomfortable questions. She kept him well away from doctors and hospitals, terrified of what they might find. Fortunately, he never got so much as a cold or the flu, and with their frequent moves, no one became suspicious of his incredible abilities and growth spurts. She taught him from a young age how to disguise his extra abilities, but he found it difficult to play dumb when he could smell and hear better than any normal human. He never experienced the need to change as his mother did, and didn't seem to have the volatile temper innate in all made werewolves. But the fact remained that he was a supernatural anomaly. Lycanthropy renders males sterile and females unable to carry a child to term. This startling fact meant that all werewolves are made by surviving a werewolf bite. Werewolves are not born. He was something no other werewolf had ever heard of. Abnormal in werewolf society, and certainly outcast in human society. If anyone ever found out the truth, he felt like an outcast in life. He would have had no shortage of female company with his looks and physique, but he tended to brush them off when they tried to strike up any kind of conversation with him. He was too nervous of unwittingly revealing his true nature, and so he assumed the persona of a quiet loner, albeit one who was never picked on or bullied, until the day she walked past him in the school corridor. He was walking to science class when a peculiar scent caught his nose. He was used to sifting through millions of different smells every day, everything from deodorant, perfume and shampoo, to bad breath, dope smoke and teenage hormones. This scent triggered an instant adrenaline surge through his body. He'd never experienced anything like it. He froze on the spot, his mind going blank as students jostled him in their rush to class. He shook himself aware enough to shove his way to the corridor wall, putting his back against it and looking around anxiously to locate the source of the scent. He closed his eyes and concentrated on that individual smell, following it to its strongest point. When his eyes flashed open, they were looking directly into the eyes of a petite auburn-haired girl on the other side of the corridor. She also seemed to be frozen in place, staring directly at him as a tide of children surged around him. He couldn't believe this strange, alarming scent was coming from this tiny slip of a girl. It wasn't even a bad smell, just different, but it made his senses scream danger. His breathing quickened, his pulse sped up, his muscles tensed in response to the fight or flight instinct suddenly controlling his body. When a student clipped him with her bag, breaking his intense concentration on the girl, and his rational mind kicked back into gear. As he breathed in deeply, reaching for a calm, he realised that although this slip of a girl, barely into her teens, was standing in the middle of the flow of students, no one touched her, no one jostled her, no one cursed her for standing in the way. It struck him as extremely odd. Her eyes suddenly narrowed and her face took on a predatory look. She stared directly into his eyes and then flicked her head to one side, her auburn curls bouncing, and looked pointedly at the exit door at the end of the corridor. He glanced at the door and then back at the girl, but she was gone. A second later, he found her looking at him from outside the open door, a small condescending smile on her lips and an open challenge in the slight raise of one eyebrow. He didn't give himself to think, he simply reacted to the dare. Curiosity killed the cat, not the wolf after all. He slipped quickly to the open door and out onto the concrete path, closing the door behind him. His breathing was still coming too fast and his heart was pounding in his chest. She was standing under a tree almost behind the gymnasium building. Anyone looking out of the classroom window wouldn't see her, but he was going to have to get really close to her if he didn't want to be spotted by a teacher. He decided to ignore his base instincts and go with the cocky self-assurance of youth who hadn't met anyone who would be a danger to him. Semi-werewolf that he was. He should probably have trusted his instincts. He melted to the shadows of the building and slipped quietly through their protection to come up a few feet behind her. The next instant he was lying face first in the dirt with both arms behind his back and a slight weight in the very centre of his spine. He was stunned. His muscles bunched to throw her off when her voice came from just behind his left ear. "If you move, I'll break your spine," she said from between clenched teeth. Her bony little knee pushed further into his vertebrae to illustrate her point. "Hold still, and we can talk." Her hands had his wrists in an unnaturally powerful grip. His wolf instinct howled to get away from her immediately, by any means necessary, but his human intuition overrode that. She wasn't actually hurting him. If she had meant him harm, she could have hurt him already. He considered the possibility that she was actually scared of him. Then he realised it was likely that she too had never smelled anything like him, and was just curious. Years of dealing with his mother had taught him that violence rarely solved anything, so he lay passively underneath her. Now that he was calmer, he could hear her heart racing, could taste the slight tang of fear and the adrenaline coming off of her, her breathing much too fast. "What are you?" she growled in a little feminine voice, her words confirming his suspicion. He raised his head a little cautiously, spitting out the dirt. "If you let me up and stop acting like a little animal, I'll tell you," he admonished. "There's no need for all the theatrics." She let him up after some assurances that he wasn't going to retaliate for her unprovoked attack. They moved further away from the school into a nearby thicket of bushes, spent the rest of the school day talking. He never thought he would meet someone else with a story as bizarre as his own. He'd never thought to meet anyone aside from his mother that he could open up to about his life without fear of rejection, revulsion, or horror, and with total understanding. What were the chances of the two of them meeting? How astounding that they found each other. How ignorant he'd been, thinking that werewolves were the only supernatural beings wandering the planet, the only creatures from human myth and legend that actually existed. Her name was Gabrielle, and like him, she was an anomaly that had been since birth. Gabrielle had the blood of a vampire running in her veins. Her mother had also been attacked when she was already pregnant, although it was so early in the pregnancy that she hadn't known it at the time. A lone vampire had attacked her one night and dragged her into the back alleyway. Unbelievably, a second vampire had appeared in the alley and, instead of joining in with the meal, had attacked the first vampire. With the fighting vampires blocking her escape route, Gabrielle's mother had been forced to witness the vicious battle at close quarters. As the two vampires ripped into each other, vampire blood sprayed directly into her face, and she'd reflexively swallowed the blood in her fright. The second vampire had ultimately beaten the first one, but seemed badly injured himself. He left the scene without a word or a glance her mother's way. Weeks later, her mother discovered she was pregnant and had been already at the time of the attack. Her parents kept this terrifying story from everyone except her father's close friend, Byron, who had his own reasons for believing and understanding the outlandish tale. Gabby was born a few months later, premature but healthy. As Gabby grew, there was little unusual about her, aside from extraordinary good health and being quick to walk and talk. There was nothing that couldn't be explained by good genes and conscientious parenting. That had all changed shortly after her 7th birthday. Her parents had found her sitting on the grass in the back garden, surrounded by wild animals. When they called to her in alarm, she calmly told them that she liked talking to the animals and they liked to talk to her. This had been the first of her powers to manifest. She could literally talk birds down from trees or soothe the most vicious dog. Not long after that, she developed amazing eyesight and hearing, and then an incredible sense of smell. Her parents had forced her to hide these extra abilities from other people. She'd only been allowed to talk to animals when she was safely alone at home or around Byron, who was privy to all the new developments. She hated the restrictions but acquiesced to her parents' wishes. Life turned tragic for her at age 10, when her father was killed by a vampire. Her father and Byron, who was Magi-born, had co-founded the Societas Malus Venatori, Hunters of Evil, a secret organisation of shapeshifters, magi and humans that monitored the supernatural activity and silently dealt out punishment to supernaturals who attacked others with apparent impunity. When a supernatural went rogue, the body count would quickly get out of hand, and the SMV routinely hunted down rogues and eliminated them, disposing of evidence of the kills and using magi to erase the memories of any humans involved. Gabby's father had been on the hunt for a particularly brutal vampire when he was killed. Gabby had had to grow up fast. She assumed many of the responsibilities of running the household, as well as looking after her mother. Byron and his wife spent as much time as they could helping out, but many tasks still fell on Gabby's slim shoulders. Between her duties at home and her mother's erratic behaviour, and her own feelings of abnormality, Gabby had no close friends and few casual friends. She comforted herself with animals and amassed a small menagerie to keep her sane. Carl and Gabby became firm friends after that first meeting, both finding immense relief in having someone they could be completely honest and open with. Carl was the perfect foil for Gabby's fiery temper and the passionate loves and hates in her life. He was strong enough to not always give in to it, and resilient enough to put up with the explosions that followed when he didn't. Gabby was Carl's first real friend, and she also presented him with the goal to work towards once she told him of the experience of the SMV. In time, most kids at school assumed they were involved in more than a platonic relationship, and although they had actually given it a try, it hadn't worked out. He was the big brother she never had, and nothing could change that. When Carl left school, he'd been accepted immediately into the SMV as a hunter trainee. But a few years later, when Gabby left school, Byron dug his heels in about Gabby joining the hunter's rank and insisted that she take time to mature and to get a territory qualification, perhaps hoping she'd give up the idea in a couple of years. Things became very strained between her and Carl after that. She felt hurt and betrayed and abandoned. It changed something between them, and their relationship no longer as easygoing as defined as it had been before. When they did meet up during her university days, she seemed dispirited and demoralised. She felt that she was letting down her father by not being a hunter. It was Carl who convinced her to learn how to fight properly, pointing out that if she got her degree and proved capable of holding her own against an enemy, Byron would have no more reasons to keep her from joining them. Carl had underestimated how much she would take his advice to heart. She threw herself into her study of animal behaviour and ethology, and in her spare time began practicing an array of martial arts, studying both the fighting styles and the history behind them. She immersed herself in Korean, Japanese and Chinese fighting styles and learnt to use their weapons. Her training choices proved to be the perfect preparation for a hunter. It took her 4 years of blood, sweat and tears to get to the point that she felt ready to demonstrate her abilities to Byron. To prove herself, she took on 2 of the best hunters of the SMV at the same time and wiped the floor with them. Convincingly. Byron had been forced to admit she could handle herself and had finally welcomed her into the fold, inducting her as the first ever female hunter. He'd also incorporated much of her martial arts training into the training routines of the existing hunters and into initiation training for future hunter hopefuls. With guns outlawed in the city, her choice of weapons was as considered and unusual as her choice of martial arts training. Her weapon of choice was her sword, Nex, appropriately meaning death. Nex was a kris, an Indonesian short sword with a cruel and distinctive appearance. Renowned for its curved, wave-shaped blade, it was designed specifically for stabbing and sliding easily between ribs, perfect for hitting the heart of any target. Not everyone got to wield one of these swords. The makers of these blades firmly believed that the blade had to choose its wielder, not the other way around. After Gabby had been successfully matched with Nex, she had the maker embed a gemstone from her father's signet ring into the hilt. She was ready without the blade, and it did indeed seem to have magical qualities in her hands. Nex had tasted Heart's blood many, many times. She also introduced the rest of the hunters to butterfly swords. Carl himself liked to carry these as backup weapons. Short, single-edged blades roughly as long as a human forearm, easy to conceal and perfect for close-quarters fighting. Sporting a D-shaped hilt, they allowed the wielder's hand some measure of protection and could be wielded in pairs. Being designed to be carried 2 in a sheath meant you could carry plenty of them. It wasn't often you ran out of butterfly swords in a fight. Gabby's degree paid dividends too, and she built a small but thriving business for herself, helping people with problem animals. Or animals with people problems, as she liked to put it. As well as training and managing animals for TV and film shoots, working for herself left plenty of free time to dedicate to the SMV, while still maintaining the all-important illusion of a normal life for the rest of the world. Have you suddenly become a doddering old man? Gabby's voice broke into his reprieve. Are you getting those blades strapped on, or are you just going to sit the whole thing out tonight? Her words were slightly slurred as she sucked on the lollipop while bitching at him. The lollipop was one of those special ones that Byron had made up for her by a pharmacist friend. She had some strange vitamin and mineral deficiency, which no one had been able to explain. It was assumed it was part and parcel of the vampire blood thing, but no one knew for sure. She was so bad at remembering to take tablets that Byron had resorted to having the supplements made into lollipops to get them into her. Gabby was also renowned for her sweet tooth. He mentally shook himself and snapped back to reality. I thought maybe I should sit this one out and see how you cope on your own for a change, he teased. She glowered at him, knowing better than to raise to his bait, and settled for throwing her lollipop stick at him. What did the geeks send? They better have tested whatever it is properly this time. Carl leaned on the van and picked up a pair of handgun-shaped weapons. He threw one at Gabby, who caught it easily and stared at it with astonishment. What the hell is this supposed to do? He threw the strap at her. But wait, it even comes with its own solidly constructed holster. Carl mimicked the overly enthusiastic voice of someone on one of those idiotic TV infomercials. I could just test it out by shooting you with it, she threatened, turning it over and pointed the barrel straight at him. Finger on the trigger. Stop messing with me, Wolf. I'm not in the mood. Chill, Hellcat. I'm just trying to lighten the mood before we all go off to be eaten or ripped apart by demons. They had a small audience by this stage, and a nervous chuckle rippled through them. Many of them had never seen the aggressive banter that sparked between Carl and Gabby before the fight. Those that knew them well just ignored them. You're going to be ripped apart before the demons get a chance at you, if you don't tell me the point of this absurd weapon, she growled. Literally. There was a reason he'd nicknamed her Hellcat. He'd seen her face down a full-grown lion and win the pissing contest. You're no fun when you're all psyched up for a fight, he muttered, presenting his own weapon with a flourish. This is a newly patented werewolf saliva duck gun. It's preloaded with 5 saliva-filled ampoules and is like having 5 mini werewolves on your side. 1 dart should be sufficient to slow down a demon enough to finish him off, or to kill him once he returns home. 2 should kill him in minutes. Carl pulled the gun apart to show the tiny ampoules inside. Needless to say, it's best to avoid shooting anyone on our side with one of these, as they will have the same effect as a real werewolf bite. Death or turning furry at a full moon. He drew in a breath to continue when a shout went up from the group near the edge of the stadium. Heads up! A male voice yelled. The gateway's opening! The air between the parking lot and the stadium began to turn hazy, and everyone began scrambling into position. Carl and Gabby strapped on their new dart guns and ran for the fence line to push through with the other hunters. Stay tuned for next week's episode.